I'm just going to do a prayer. I give thanks to the Most High God for me to be here today. I ask that the Most High God guides me, guides us to do the will of his people. Amen. This is actually a hymn to love. I'm going to start out with a scripture. It's one of my favorites. It's 1 Corinthians 13:13, and it reads, "And now abideth faith, hope, love, these three, but the greatest of these is love." So I'm going to talk to you a little bit, real briefly, about reparations. And so what I did is what I normally do, is I start out with defining it. So, of course, I went to Google, and I came up with reparations is defined as a repairing or keeping in repair, the act of making amends, giving satisfaction for a wrong or an injury. I'm going to leave it right there. The title that I selected was Reparations, a Call for Healing and Justice. And most of what I have to share with you, because I wanted to be kind of brief, was taken from attorney Barbara Keshen, who was the former New Hampshire Civil Liberties Staff Attorney and the chair of the New Hampshire Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. So this was taken from some of her speech on reparations. So she started with, let's start with a simple truth. America would not be the country that it is today without its history of enslavement. The early American economy was based in large on cotton. Growing cotton, exporting cotton, and manufacturing cotton was the foundation of this country. And without enslavement, none of that would have been possible. Or rather, it might have been possible, but the profit margin for European landowners and exporters and manufacturers would have been vastly diminished. I'd just like to share with you that my grandmother, Maggie Bailey, picked cotton every day, 7 days a week, for 50 cents a day, not an hour, a day. And she would tell us the story that at the end of the week, she would have $3.50, and her auntie would give her 10 cents for herself. That is a personal story for me, because I used to hear it over and over and over again. But even though I heard the story, and I was, as a child, somewhat burdened by it, I did not pick cotton for that 50 cents a day. And I can imagine that that was really a hard job. Just to go back to her text now. She talks a little bit about Jamestown was established in 1607, and the first people who were enslaved were brought to the colony of Virginia in 1619. They were essential to the development of young America, where land vast but scarce labor. So for the next 250 years, American law and society worked to create two Americas, one for people of African descent and one for Europeans. The worth of African people and free labor to America cannot really be calculated. Although some social scientists have tried, they have estimated that the worth, adjusted for inflation, was between $9.72 billion and $6.54 trillion. That is a lot of money. And the group that created that wealth reaped nothing. I should say the group that helped created that wealth because Europeans were involved in that process. But the group that helped create the wealth reaped nothing. Even worse, they were ripped apart from their families. So what we saw with the immigration here recently of people being taken from their parents, children being left, that was nothing new for our country. So people of African descent were ripped apart from their families. Some of them were raped, both the men and the women. They were beaten and they were terrorized. And while Europeans in America prospered, what about the African community? Not so much, not then, not now. When? I'm suggesting reparations. And now, abide, faith, hope, love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. This love we speak of is unconditional. The mid-20th century saw the great immigration of people of African descent heading north and west, and in my case to the Midwest, looking to get away from the institutional racism, poverty, and violence of the South. People of African descent went to Chicago, Los Angeles, Detroit, Boston, looking for fairness and an opportunity to raise their families. My folks are from Mississippi, and they migrated to Chicago. So people of African descent started to prosper. They got jobs, they saved money, and they secured a piece of the American dream, a house of their own. However, there were policies such as redlining, made it difficult for many people of African descent to prosper, and the income gap remains today, September 23rd, 2018. So what I didn't mention is that I am a member of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, in COBRA. I'm actually the national secretary of that organization. There was a founding meeting in September 26, 1987, and we convened for the purpose of broadening the base of support for long-standing reparation movement. So people who look like me have not just started talking about reparations, we've started talking about it since we were brought here. Reparations is about repair, repair of a human spirit, repair of the dignity that was taken from us, and yes, compensation for the work that we did and did not get paid. And I'm not talking about what my grandmother got paid. She got a little bit of money. Some of us didn't get anything. So we have 5 injury areas. The one is peoplehood, which is the destruction of the African people's culture and the infringement of the larger culture upon our people in the United States and prior colonies. Jim Crow and the ongoing discrimination have resulted in the denial of our right to openly express our culture, appropriation of our culture, and denial of the right and resources necessary to be self-determining people, to decide what we want to do. Throughout this country, the history of African descendants' efforts to be self-determined have been met with violence and destruction, as evidenced by the untold numbers of black townships such as Greenwood, Oklahoma, Rosewood, Florida, and Wilmington, North Carolina. Townships ultimately destroyed because of the surrounding European communities' jealousy and need to suppress models that refute their claims to white supremacy. Education is one of our second injuries. Denial, again, of our right to an education started in the enslavement process with criminal sanctions imposed on our enslaved ancestors who learned and anyone who taught them to read or write. Maintenance of a dual, separate but equal or unequal systems in education. Federal funds were often provided for schools despite their dual education system. One, predominantly Caucasian, and the other for predominantly people of African ancestry. Health is one of our third injury areas. The focus is not just on physical health, but the mental health. Health knowledge of enslaved Africans was appropriated, and enslaved Africans functioned on non-paid health care providers for others and the use of African descent subjects for torturous health experiments. The Tuskegee syphilis study is one of those examples. And the denial of quality health care during the post-enslavement. We even have that now in 2018, where we are disproportionately treated in our health care facilities. The health injury is also including the continuing discrimination in the provision of health care, including the disproportionately higher rate of closures of hospitals serving communities of African descent, lack of access to health insurance to provide affordable access to health care. I can go on, but I'm gonna stop there. Our fourth one is the criminal punishment. The enslavement of African people necessitates the development of a dual punishment system that continues to exist in the United States even up today. This dual system punishes people of African descent more harshly than the Europeans for the same conduct. I think we're kind of familiar with that. Examples of this dual system are the brother in Chicago who was shot while walking away by a police officer, and that trial is going on right now. Not today, but right now in 2018. So, and then there's the ongoing discrimination that most vividly evident is the continuation of this desperate punishment for crack and powder cocaine. There are many people of African descent across this country who are enslaved because of the use of marijuana and the selling of marijuana. And now we living in an age where marijuana is considered legal in some states. And it looks like it might be a way for some people to make money legally. But yet we have many of the men and women that look like me who are currently incarcerated. And then wealth and poverty. The wealth gap between people of African descent and Europeans created during the enslavement of African people has been sustained. Confiscation of land and other forms of wealth continue up to this present day. People of African descent are forced into poverty through enslavement. So you know what else I did? I took a moment and I went to the Unitarian Universalists website. And I want to share some things with you that you already know, but I'm obligated to share them with you. I went to the one that says, what do we believe about God? The Unitarian Universalists have many ways of naming what is sacred. Some believe in God, some don't believe in God. Some believe in a sacred force at work in the world and call it love, mystery, source of all, or spirit of life. We join together not because we have a shared concept of the divine. Rather, we gather knowing that life is richer in community than when we go at it alone. We gather to know and be known, to comfort and be comforted, to celebrate the mystery that binds us each to all. You got 7 principles. I looked at 3 of them. Principle number 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And 6, the goal of the world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you today, and I end as I began. And now abideth faith, hope, love, these three. But the greatest of these is love.
Well, I don't know. We're in cahoots. Anyway, the offering will now be given and received. Please be generous.